Welcome again to New Wine Church, and thanks for joining us online. You're always welcome to worship with us in person. We meet on Sundays at 4 p.m. at the foot of historic downtown Newmarket at 484 Water Street. But this is part 3 of 4 in our summer series, Home Church. How homes transformed people's lives and built the church. So hear these words from Acts 9:32 through 43, the story of Peter, Aeneas, and Tabitha. As Peter traveled about the country, he went to visit the Lord's people who lived in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas, who was paralyzed and had been bedridden for 8 years. Aeneas, Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and roll up your mat. Immediately Aeneas got up. All those who lived in Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. In Joppa there was this disciple named Tabitha. In Greek her name is Dorcas. And she was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became really sick and died, and her body was washed and then placed in the upstairs room. Now Lydda was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. So Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. And all the widows in the house stood around him, and crying and showing with him the robes and the other clothing Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room, and then he got down on his knees and he prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. And she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for all the believers in the house, especially the widows, and he presented her to them alive. Now this became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. So then Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. So let's do some backdrop work before we go further into this story. So where we are on the map, our story takes place in Lydda, Sharon, and Joppa, all of which are in Judea, which is one of the places the apostles, like Peter, stayed while many of the new Jesus followers fled in fear of Saul. Lydda is on a major trade route. So it's to and from the Mediterranean, and it's a place of high commerce. It is at this time mostly populated by Jews. Sharon then is just outside of Lydda, and then Joppa is the major port city. So Joppa, although predominantly Jewish, is also secondarily influenced by Greek culture because it's a port city. So Peter's traveling around the country of Judea, checking in on the house churches in the region. And Peter is employing his pastoral heart, going around the region to visit and encourage churches in the wake of Stephen's death and the persecution that the church was facing. So while he's in Lydda, he learns about this man named Aeneas, and he's been paralyzed for 8 years. So he's been immobile and bedridden for almost a decade, relying on the grace and strength of others to care for him. I don't know about you, when I'm sick in bed, I'm antsy and I want to get up after about 48 hours. Even if I'm not really feeling better, I'm ready to be well. Like back to my normal self and back to my normal energy. I also know that some of you have cared for patients or an aging parent or maybe a spouse before who has become dependent on you for their meals, their bathing, their toileting, their getting dressed. And that's not easy. And depending on the person receiving the care, it's not always easy for them to receive the care. Because for some, it can feel humiliating. For some, they so badly miss their independence and agency to move about and do things for themselves, and it's really hard. Now, for some more cultural context in this time and place, because there's two things going on for Aeneas. First, if someone is paralyzed in this time and place or is suffering from some other disease, it was widely believed that they brought this ailment upon themselves. No doubt there were people who saw Aeneas and believed that because of some sin in his own life, or maybe his parents' or grandparents' life, he was justifiably stricken with this punishment in the form of paralysis. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, yeah, this karma. And that's what a lot of people believed. They probably wouldn't have used that word, but the implementation of a caste is certainly at play. This ranking of human lives, which is still at play, whether we have a formal system for it or not, unfortunately allows those in the higher caste, the able-bodied ones, to dismiss those in the lower ones. And they're not expected to care for those at the bottom. Second, this is a patriarchal society, and there's no hiding from it. Simply put, this man, Aeneas, who has lost his independence, is no longer considered to have worth as a man. So when Peter learns of Aeneas, he goes immediately to him. He finds Aeneas lying on his mat. He kneels down next to him and he calls his name. Aeneas. When do you suppose the last time was when Aeneas looked in the eyes of someone and was called by name? Already Peter has taken a step in giving this man some dignity that he's gone without for about 8 years. When Aeneas meets Peter's eyes, Peter says, Jesus Christ heals you. So get up and take care of your mat. First, Jesus Christ heals you. Said with such conviction. Like no doubt in Peter's mind, Aeneas would be healed the moment he said it. We don't know what caused this paralysis, but without a doubt, this man has suffered muscular atrophy over the last 8 years. His legs have not moved. They have not held his body or any weight for a very long time. How is he able to simply get up? I'm telling you, this is an absolute act of God. A total miracle that he's able to be healed. And when the text says he immediately got up, that's a miracle. And then he says, get up and take care of your mat. Or in other words, get up and make your bed. This is the first act of independence and agency Aeneas has had in years. Do something for yourself. See for yourself that you have been restored, that you can walk, you can make your own bed. Peter, through the power of Jesus, restores this man's dignity and quality of life. Smashing these preconceived notions and prejudicial thoughts the society had held about this man, this is restorative justice. This is love and compassion and mercy that Jesus brings. And as much as this healing had to do with Aeneas being able to walk again, it was also about Jesus making things equitable. So while this is going on in the nearby town of Joppa, there's this woman who had just died. And this woman was Jewish and part of the Jesus movement in town. Her name was Tabitha, and this was her given name. It's an Aramaic name meaning gazelle or big bright eyes. Now, the fact that she lived in the large port city of Joppa, she also lived among many Greek-speaking residents, people who had come for trade and for work. The text tells us that Tabitha was also known as Dorcas, which makes this a really hard talk with junior high students. But the fact that she was known as Dorcas means that she mingled with enough Greek speakers that she became well known and well loved by this other immigrant community. Her name, Dorcas, is an iteration of the Greek word derkomai, which means to see clearly. What seems like trivial information in these couple verses actually says a lot about her character. A Hebrew woman living in a large metropolis becomes a well-loved person in both her culture of origin and her new growing adopted culture of Greek speakers. Those she comes in contact with see her as someone who sees them. What we also find out from the text is that she's a widow. This is important to note because being a widow was not simply something that signified that your husband died. It also placed you in a societal category. Her place in society, the moment she becomes a widow, she becomes dependent on either her late husband's family, which means she might become a second wife to her brother-in-law. It may mean that she also lives with other widows who collectively rely on each other and society's alms and compassion if they can find it. From what we can gather from the text, it looks as though Dorcas lived with other widows, but it doesn't seem like she was totally dependent on others. Because when Peter arrived at her house, there were other widows there mourning the loss of their dear friend, showing Peter and the other disciples all the robes, all the garments she had made for people of the community. She likely sold some of them, but mostly graciously donated most of her product to those in need. She had become well known in her city for her product and for her generosity. When Peter arrived at her house, we're told that she had been dead for a while. She had already been taken to the upper room of the house, which is where you're ceremonially washed and then prepared for burial. She is surrounded by her friends who are weeping and mourning her loss, and Peter asks them to step out of the room for a moment. And once they leave, Peter kneels down next to her and begins to pray. We don't know what he prays for. We don't know how he prays. We don't know what he hears from the Lord, but we know that he hears something from Jesus. Because when he concludes his prayer, he says with as much assurance and conviction as he had when speaking to Aeneas, he turns to Tabitha and says, "Tabitha, get up." And she opens her eyes and takes this gigantic breath of air into her lungs and comes back to life. And she sits up and walks downstairs with Peter. Would that not freak anybody out? So she meets the group and they are overjoyed at her restoration. Their tears of sadness are turned into tears of joy and shouts of praise and total amazement at what they're witnessing. And as wonderful and as amazing as this miracle is, this also reveals the character of Christ. Because here we have a widow, which is unfortunately the first thing most people would know her or call her by. Who she is in relation to having a husband in her case, which she does not. And because of that, much like Aeneas, she is looked upon with pity and viewed as unfortunate and less than. But she is valued by Jesus. She is a woman known for her compassion and strength and ingenuity and agency, her benevolence. She is well known for it in her home culture and well known for it in her adopted one. And Jesus restores her life, showing those who might think otherwise that her life absolutely has value. She is a follower of Jesus who lives her life to the fullest and for the sake of others. And that is who Jesus invites us all to be. As Jesus is building his church through the apostles and the disciples, he is showing us how to see in this world. He is changing constantly how we might otherwise value and give worth to people in our community. He says, see them. They are mine. They are loved. They are precious. They are valued. They have something to offer you. They need you and you need them. This is how I'm going to build my church. This is who I'm building my church with. So the question is, who do we need help to see? I invite you to pray about that. Pray for who to see and what your next step might be. There are people that we see in our community we have preconceived notions about, whether they've come from within or come from the outside. There are certain things we think about certain people, and Jesus says they have value, they have worth, and they have something to teach you. So as Jesus followers, we are called to go into the community, to give value, to see value for those who are put on the outside, those who are put lower in our unofficial caste system. This is the call of Christ. This is the call. This is how Christ is building his church. It's true in Acts and it's true today. I pray that we just have eyes to see it and the courage to do something about it.